Well, I think it's still morning, so let me say good morning to all of you. Good morning. We are so happy to have you here. We welcome you to the West Harpeth Church. We are here on a very special, I think, occasion today because, as most of you are aware, there are a lot of things that are going on in our society at large. And with these things going on, it is incumbent upon us to pay attention to what's going on. We are aware of the impact that obstacles have upon us. And I wanted to take just a moment to share some things that went on and are going on in my mind that have impacted and influenced how I grew up in this area. I guess I should say first that I am probably different from most of you in this area. I am a native Williamson County. Born here, grew up here. So I've been here almost 70 years. And as a person being here that long, I have noticed all of the changes that have occurred during that period of time. Principally, I want to relate those changes to what has been happening in the news regarding the statues that have been being talked about in the news, even the statue that's on the square in the city of Franklin. You read about what happened in Charlottesville. I was just flabbergasted about what happened there. But it raised up in me some feelings that I really didn't know how to handle. I was bothered about it, but let me just take just a short minute or two to kind of tell you how I felt. It bothered me because some things came up in my spirit that said that those people should have been very concerned and upset about those statues. Because I was bothered about what had gone on in my life. I was one of those kids that remembered on the square in Franklin, downtown Franklin, where when you went in the courthouse on the square, there were black and white water fountains. They weren't black, they were called colored. There were colored and white bathrooms. I remember the restaurants up and down Main Street that you had to, if you were a person of color, you went down the alley and you knocked on the door and put in your order, and you had to wait in the alley until they brought you your food. And you paid for it and you went home. I remember those kind of things. I remember when you went to the one theater that was in Franklin, you had to go in the balcony. You couldn't go on the floor to watch the picture show. I remember those things. Fast forward. When my children went to school, they had to go to a high school where the mascot was a rebel. And we had been so conditioned that they were playing in a band where they represented a rebel whose sole job was to depress people of color. But we did not say anything about it, and it depressed me to think that that's what was going on. And then when I thought about the statue downtown, I said, it ought to come down, because that's a situation that represents this continuing psychological oppression. And then I had an opportunity to talk with Eric Jacobson, because every time I had talked with someone about this thing before, all that people would talk about it, they say, this is just history, it's just history, it's just history. They had talked about history so much, I'll just be honest, it made me sick. History. Well, Eric had a gifting to be able to help me to understand that maybe it is history, but the dilemma is that what I was telling him was also history. It just hadn't been told. And so that history also needs to be told. And I don't mind telling you, when he told me that, I said, Eric, I ain't buying it. I'm gonna have to go pray about this. And if God reveals to me that that's right, I'll tell you. And sure enough, God opened up my thinking enough to help me to understand. Amen. And so that's what this meeting is about today. Because Kevin Riggs and Chris Williamson and I have been meeting, and we've been talking about these issues. And Kevin was on the square a few weeks ago when there was a meeting going on down there. Now, I'm going to ask Kevin if he would now come up and talk about what went on down there on the square and proceed further in talking about this issue and what our thoughts are regarding how we should move further. Kevin Riggs.
I appreciate Pastor Hewitt telling us those stories and having them on videotape because I've heard them so many times, and it's good now to have it. We can reference back to it, and my heart's moved every time I hear him talk about his own experience. Let me just give you a little bit of context that brought us to this point today. And it goes back to the Charlottesville incident. And a couple days after the Charlottesville incident, I was in Nashville for some rallies and some demonstrations inside the Capitol building to remove the Edward Bedford Forrest bust that is there. And so I was down there for a couple of hours, and then on my way back to Nashville, or back to Franklin, Chris Whitney texted me and said, "Do you know what's going on at the square tonight? There's some type of rally," and the police had contacted Chris to see if he knew anything about what was going on. And then Chris contacted me, and none of us knew what was going on at that rally, just that there was going to be a rally at 5 p.m. whatever night that was. It may have been a Monday if I remember right, but maybe not. And so I got the word out to the network of pastors who I have on text, and no one seemed to know what was going on. And so I wasn't planning on going down there because I didn't know who was in charge, didn't know what it was about, so I thought, well, I'm just not going to go. About 15 minutes before the rally started, Elder Haynes texted me and said that he had a church member who worked in the downtown area, and the rumor was that the KKK was actually in charge of the rally. And so I said, well, are you going? He said, well, I'm headed down there now. And I said, well, I'll meet you down there. And my intentions were to go down there, see what was up, and then call in the troops if necessary. I didn't want to believe that's what it was about, but that's what he had said. So we got down there, and the rally was not about that. That was just a rumor. It wasn't even close to being that. It seemed to be a social media driven thing from a lady in Brentwood who was just wanting to have a peace rally. And so I introduced myself to her, and I introduced Elder Haynes to her, and she asked if one of us would say something and one of us would pray. And then Pastor Chris showed up, and Pastor Chris and Pastor Elder Haynes and myself have been in relationship for quite a while. And at different times over the years, the past 20 years, we've mentioned, you know, and that statue, just something needs to be done about that statue. And so that was on my mind. I was just coming from Nashville, and then in the back of my mind went down there because I thought this may have been a white supremacy thing. And so when I got up to say something, Elder Haynes prayed, but when I got up to say something, I simply made the statement that, you know, we're not so far removed from Charlottesville. We have our own monument here in the square that represents something that maybe it doesn't need to represent, and maybe it's time for churches to come together and talk about, can we do something to remove this? Is this what we want to be the vocal point of our downtown area? Well, the press picked that up, and it was on the news and in the newspapers, and that week was one of the worst weeks of my ministry. I got quite a bit of hate mails, a couple phone calls, and just a lot of different things going on. So the following Sunday at church, the church rallied around me with a time of prayer and all that, so it ended up being a good thing. But I think it was either that next morning after that rally, Eric contacted me and said he'd like to talk with me. Told me who he was and he'd like to talk with me. And I could tell in his voice it was urgent. I was urgent, and I said, well, can we meet today? And so in a matter of an hour or so after talking on the phone or somewhere around that, but anyway, we met very, very quickly. And he started telling me some ideas that he had been having about this. And there seemed to be some commonality. He wasn't saying, let's go get a tow truck and tear the monument down. And that was never my intention either, that we would just, you know, go down there. And I got a little nervous the next couple of nights when the police had to have extra guards around the statue, that if something bad would have happened somehow or another, it may have been pointed back to being my fault for bringing the subject up. But anyway, so when Eric told me what was on his mind, I thought, well, I need to introduce you to some friends. And so I set up another meeting with Eric, with Chris, and Chris and I sat down with Eric, and Eric explained things to him. And then we got Hewitt involved, and the city was concerned, and so they reached out to me, and so the three of us went and met with Mayor Moore and City Administrator Eric Stuckey about our concerns and about our concerns about what was going on. And Pastor Hewitt was able to share his experience growing up in Franklin and what the monument meant to him. And so, you know, there was some. It was a good discussion, and the city is saying, you know, well, we got to be careful about all this. The state law, we can't go into a lot of detail, but the Tennessee state passed a law a few years ago that virtually makes it impossible to remove any type of historical marker. And if you've been following the news, you know, the city of Memphis voted to remove a Robert E. Lee statue. The state said you can't do that. And then there was a vote to remove the Bedford bust in the Capitol, and the state said you can't do that. And so the odds of us doing something like that would be an uphill battle, to say the least. And so Eric's idea was something about putting the story and putting the monument and telling a fuller story. And in a private conversation with Eric afterwards, I let Eric know, hopefully in a loving way, that I wasn't going to do anything that the African American pastors didn't want to do. And if such a plan was okay with them, I'm with it. But if my brothers said it needs to come down, then it needs to come down, you know, and I'll stand with them in that fight. And so anyway, so that's what's brought us here. And so Eric's going to come. Eric is the CEO of I always get this wrong, but the Battlefield Trust, or the
Battle of Franklin Trust.
Battle of Franklin Trust. He's the CEO, and he does have a wonderful way of telling the story. And so he's just going to come and present kind of his idea about contextualizing and telling a fuller story downtown in downtown Franklin that will hopefully be uplifting to our African American community. So were you going to, Chris has got something he wants to pass out as Eric tells his idea. So Eric, come and share with us. Thank you for being here.
Anyone who knows me knows this. It will be incredibly difficult for me to try and contain myself into 15 minutes. But I want to try and provide some context from not just my perspective, but the perspective of history and the role that I occupy in the historic community. Obviously, Franklin is and was terribly impacted by the battle fought here on November 30th, 1864. I have certainly had many of my own struggles in a different way with telling a fuller story of history. I've shared a little bit with Kevin and Hewitt and Chris and Bill and Dennis know it's not always easy when you are fighting against, as far as Civil War history is concerned, 150 years of a very carefully crafted narrative that many people know as the lost cause, which was to turn everything about the war into everything other than slavery, and to really sanitize it or whitewash it, for lack of better terms. I've gotten my share of hate mail and phone calls for a different reason than many would receive based solely on their statements or based on their race. I think in some ways, what I have received has reshaped me, because it really made me look at things in a different way. But I will be perfectly honest. I remember in the summer of 2015, in the aftermath of the awful shootings in South Carolina, and when I saw what Dylan Roof did in a church because of people's race, I remember thinking, this actually may be the thing that kills the lost cause, because it reignited an entirely new conversation about symbols and about lies. Lies that have been told not just to the black community, but lies that have been told to the entire American community. I'm one of those people that goes to cemeteries all the time. I go to battlefields. I've seen all different kinds of monuments. I think I said this to Chris. The monument in the downtown square in Franklin has certainly never given me any sort of warm and fuzzies, to be kind of honest with you. I was raised in Minnesota, so there was nothing about that monument that directly appealed to me. In fact, I always thought it was odd as I traveled across the South that there were so many monuments, especially to a particular cast of characters. Lee, Davis, Forrest, Jackson. Those seemed to be like the big four. But then there were these individual soldiers' monuments. And I thought many years ago that it would really be wonderful to tell a different kind of story. But as with many things, the time just never seems right. We're busy doing this, we're busy doing that. And then Dylan Roof. Then Charlottesville. And the conversation is reignited. So I was there the night of the rally because I wanted to see what was going on. I didn't know, because you heard it was the Ku Klux Klan. I heard it was Antifa. rumors are rampant. Social media really is in some ways the bane of our existence because it just spreads like a virus. Turns out it was, of course, quiet, peaceful. But I immediately reached out to Kevin. He reached out. I've already learned so much from he and Chris and Hewitt. I think my conversation with Hewitt was one of the most, I don't get nervous about much. That made me a little nervous because I wasn't sure that Hewitt would hear what I was saying. And whether you knew it at the time or not, your opinion mattered a great deal. So I had this crazy notion that instead of, I do believe that the monument here, not everything is the same, and not all monuments are the same. And I believe that. That's why I said let's not get the tow truck up there. Because I believe that a monument to a collective group, which also speaks to the collective experience of a community that was greatly impacted by this war, is different than, for example, a monument to Nathan Bedford Forrest put up in Memphis in 1907 at the height of Jim Crow in the aftermath of Ida B. Wells's groundbreaking writing about lynchings. Those monuments are not the same. So I said, what if, and because there's legislation in place, it's going to be a struggle, why not, why have the fight to have the fight, but why not surround the monument with history? I have to say this as a side note, I always found it interesting that the monument, because that's what it is, it's a thing, but he has a name. I just did it. I just felt, it's not even a he, it's an it. But it has a name, which gives it this sort of warm and fuzzy feeling to a lot of people. That's Chip. It's just a monument. It doesn't even really personify a real person. It's a collective sort of thing. But I thought, why not surround the monument with history? And I was actually in a meeting before I met with Chris one day, I thought, there's a symbolic opportunity too. And as Bill and Dennis probably know better than anyone in the room, I like to be a little bit edgy. I like to push interpretive things right up to the edge because I like to challenge people and make them think differently about a subject. And this would be, I will tell everyone in this room, this would be edgy, but I know there's support for it. Mm-hmm. Is to surround Chip with history, but also to surround Chip with African American history. Not all of it is easy. Not all of it is going to make people smile. But it's real. It's real. And it needs to be told. So as you look at the sheet, you might notice my idea, and these are just ideas, is to have 4 interpretive markers placed around the monument. These would be markers in the style of Civil War trails markers. You can see them currently on the battlefield close to Carter House and close to Carnton. They're about that big. They sit at a 45-degree angle. They have a particular color tone to them, visual imagery, and great text. I'm not going to go in any particular order, but the one that I've always found quite ironic about the very ground on which that monument stands was the location of the 1st and 2nd Williamson County courthouses. First courthouse was a log structure, soon replaced by a brick structure, which stood from about 1805 until 1855. Attached to the courthouse was a market house. A market house in which men, women, and children were bought and sold for nearly 60 years. It is time to tell this story. And to everyone in the room who's white, it is time to tell the story to white people. And frankly, if they come out of Mellow Mushroom and they think they're having a good time and they read a marker and it jolts them, that's the point. Make them think about what happened in town squares all over this country for generations. Talk about conditioning. It's an advertisement in the newspaper. for sale on the courthouse steps. Put it up. Make people think. Another marker that I would love, because I think every school child, every young person should know who this man was Samson Keeble. He was the first African American to serve in the Tennessee General Assembly. He was elected in 1873. Samson Keeble is proof that Reconstruction was not a failure. That's another lie that's been propagated and pushed onto American society. Reconstruction was not an abysmal failure. Well, it may have been a failure if you were white and a former Confederate, but largely there were many successes. 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, first major Civil Rights Act in 1866, a real Civil Rights Act in 1875. Black men began to vote in America, and Samson Keeble was elected. He should be recognized and remembered.
Amen.
300 men from this county became soldiers in the U.S. Army, literally fighting for their freedom. The United States colored troops did not fight at Franklin, but they came from this county, and in fact at least 2 of them that I am aware of died at the Battle of Nashville, atop Peach Orchard Hill. In fact, they were so gallant, they were actually recognized in the official report of, unbelievably, a Confederate officer who actually recognized their valor. They were literally fighting for their freedom, but I think everyone here knows that. The fourth marker, although on this sheet we decided to list the Franklin race riot, it could be one of many things. This was just an idea. The riot in Franklin, I think, is an interesting episode to the city's history. It's a 2-day riot involving members of the black community, the white community on both sides of the spectrum, white Unionists, former Confederates, the Ku Klux Klan, and it was just a brawl up and down Main Street for the better part of 48 hours. Hundreds of people injured. A number were killed. They had to bring troops in from Nashville to finally put an end to it. But it could be other things. It could be a marker to Jim Crow and the monument. It could be a marker to another historic element. I think the symbolism of surrounding that monument with other elements of history, because there are steps that come up on all 4 sides. City right away. I know the mayor and I know the city administrator, having spoken to them, but also that I know them. They're supportive of the effort. They believe it is time. But then the last item is a conversation that kind of brewed out of a talk I had with Julian Bibb, who many of you know. And Julian, of course, is, if you know him, has been trying to retire and go to live on the hill down at Sewanee for years. But I called Julian and I said, I need your help. Here's my crazy idea. What do you think? What should we do? How can we make this happen? And he said, well, what about a monument at 5 Points? We talked about this once before. He said, what about a monument, or a statue, I guess it may maybe be the proper description, at 5 Points to a USCT, one of those 300 men. But again, a monument or a statue to a collective group representing another element of Williamson County's history. And place him in Veterans Park right there, kind of, y'all know where it's at, kind of kitty corner from the Starbucks, where there's already memorials to veterans of all wars. And literally have him staring down Main Street at Chip. I guess Chip kind of looks up the other street, kind of toward the river is the way he's oriented, but why not? Why not put the man there? So then, after that conversation, I talked to Kevin, and talked to Chris, and talked to Hewitt, and then I thought of my friend, Bill Radcliffe, because this is actually a statue that's up in Madison, at the National Cemetery. If you've never been just a quick story about the National Cemetery. I remember visiting the National Cemetery the first time probably 20 years ago. And I'm going to tie this into what I thought about when I mentioned how the Confederate monument doesn't exactly give me the warm and fuzzies. Although I didn't have, I was very, I would say, I didn't feel one way or the other. But I remember going here. And I think maybe it was because I was from Minnesota, which is the north. I'm so far north, I'm almost Canadian. There are 13,000 men buried here from all over the north. Connecticut, New York, Michigan, Minnesota, Illinois, Tennessee. There's a little bit of history too. You know, there were white Tennesseans who wore the blue uniform. Missouri, Ohio, on and on, Iowa. Most of them poor, white, defending the Union, ultimately helping to free 4 million people. 13,000 of them buried up there at Madison. They died far from home. Railroad track runs right through the middle of the cemetery. How convenient was that? Just kept shipping the bodies up there. Die in Nashville, die on battlefields, ship them up and be buried. And then there was this little corner up in the cemetery where all these black soldiers were buried. And when I first visited there, that wasn't there. But it is now. And the model for this lovely piece of art is our own Bill Radcliffe. And so I called Bill and I said, would you consider, if we could somehow pull this off, would you model for us one more time? Would you consider it? Bill for years has portrayed USCT men. I think we can do this. I think we can put up markers that tell thousands of people another part of this town and this state's history. And we perhaps could get up a statue to commemorate these men. And maybe what we can do is we can show the rest of this country how, I don't know how if it's healing, but how to tell a full story of history and be an example and not be a place like Charlottesville. And frankly not have it be a sort of protracted fight like in Memphis. I can do my part in Franklin. I know there is support for this. I know there is. The monuments, the markers are very inexpensive. The monument, you know, we're talking less than 100,000, but more than 50. So it's not cheap, but it's not a mountain that can't be climbed. I think we can do this, but more than anything, I just think we should.
That's right.
I think we should. I think it's time. I have tried everything we have tried at the Battle of Franklin Trust to tell a fuller story, to tell it all, to be honest. Slavery was our problem from the beginning. It was why we fought this terrible war, and it's why we've struggled for 150 years to get to where we are today. But it is time. And now, not only is it time, and it may have been time 50 years ago, it may have been time 80 years ago. Now's the time we can actually do this. And there's a generation coming up, I see it with my own kids, 24 and 18 and younger. They're not going to carry around the baggage we've got. And if we do this right, they'll just know that the history is right in front of them, and it's not a one-sided history. We've all been impacted by this. All of us. Some more than others. I've had that flag shoved in my face to the point where I've wanted to shove it right back. But I think sometimes the best way to do it isn't to shove it back. Beat them with the documents. Show them the words. Tell the truth. and let people from far and wide who visit this beautiful town, who may be walking downtown and never go to the battlefield or never go to the Williamson County Museum, but they'll see a little bit down there. And they may read about Samson Keeble and go, wow, I've never heard of this man before. Wow, there were 300 people from this county who served the U.S. Army. Runaway slaves, free men. And then they may look up at the monument and go, wow, that's interesting too. And then they're on their way. But they may learn something else. Because right now you don't really learn a whole lot, do you? To be honest. It's a piece of art with a little inscription on it. Doesn't really tell you much about anything. I think we can do it. I'm willing to help any way I can. Thank you.
Can I say something very quickly about this statue? Eric didn't tell the whole story. This was a first in any national cemetery in the United States, and it happened in Nashville, Tennessee. There is now a duplicate of this statue in Freedom Park in Helena, Arkansas. So it can be done. And I have to say something about this guy. You see this statue's on a short pedestal. It ain't like Chip standing way up there, see? And I know for a fact, when they were going to put this statue in the cemetery, they were going to put it on a high pedestal. And he said no. And they said, well, we have to put it on a high pedestal. That's what they do. And he said no. And they said, well, give us a good reason why it has to be on a short pedestal. He said, because 100 years from now, I want a child to look me in the eye and ask me why I'm here. It could be the same thing here in Franklin.
As it has been said, it can be done. It should be done. And it will be done. It will be done to the degree that we come together to do it. Following this meeting, we wanted to make sure that, as Kevin referenced earlier, that we begin with the ministers in the African American community first, to talk with you, to fill you in with this vision. We didn't invite the press. We didn't invite members from pastors and leaders from the broader community. We will talk to them next. But we want to come to you first. We want to get your input. We want to get your support so that we can do this thing properly. My daughter, this morning, when she saw that I was going out the door for this meeting, she saw these papers that I gave you. And she is a senior at Franklin High School with the Rebel mascot. And she cheers for the Rebels. And thanks be to God, they won their second game last night. Dismal season. But when she saw this, she got excited. And that spark in her eye, even as you mentioned, being able to look into the eye of the soldier that you represented, that all people, but especially our young black women and men, need to be able to see these kinds of references so that we can walk with our head a little bit higher as we walk through a square that typically doesn't have much that we can identify with there. We thank God for the Macklemore House and the work that has been going on there, and even at the former Natchez High, which is now Claiborne Hughes, that we've been talking about doing a march through the city of Franklin to go through some of these historical places that are very pertinent and important to the African American experience here in Franklin. So we believe there's something going on, that with the negative experience in Charlottesville, something that has been used to bring division in our country. But even as Brother Hewitt said, it has even caused some things that have been suppressed in blacks and whites to rise to the surface. And because of the president that we have in office now, it makes it a little bit more socially acceptable if the things that rise to the surface are negative and put other people down. But real pain also rises to the surface. And leaders are people who set a path for other people to follow. And I think we have an opportunity as leaders in the community to do something, as Eric said, that not only brings healing in our community, but I think we can set a model for other communities as well. Because in every community, as Eric mentioned, you have these places where our ancestors were bought and sold, lynched and discriminated against. And that story needs to be told in those communities as well if they're not being told. So we have a moral responsibility. We can do this, we should do this, and we will do this. As I mentioned, we'll meet next with members from the broader community. They'll come here as well. We'll use lunch to get them here, just like we got you here. But we also know that once this vision begins to get out, we believe people will run with it. We believe it will excite people. And when we met with the mayor and the city planner, no, they weren't too interested in removing the statue. That's where we were earlier when we first got started, and I would even venture to say a lot of that was also emotion, just raw emotion, and seeing statues coming down in other communities across the country. But as we stepped away, Hewitt says, as he prayed after talking to Eric, cooler heads began to prevail, and we said, you know what? It may be more strategic to surround Chip with a fuller story as opposed to removing Chip and not having the story there. So we believe this may cause people to be more interested in Civil War history, the fuller history of the Civil War. I must tell you that every time I hear Eric speak, I get excited. I get so excited, I'm like, he's got to come preach at my church one Sunday. I mean, when I hear him, I can hear him tell stories and go on and on. And the fact that he knows so much about my ancestors makes me love him even more. Because I know for him, these are not just facts. He truly loves history and the people who made that history, and even the descendants of those folks. So we just feel like, Hewitt, Kevin, and I, that we're in the midst of something that's holy. We really do. We feel like we're in the midst of something that is awestruck. Like, really, we see it happening. And we hope you see it happening, and we hope that you will also participate with us. As we talk about what these markers are, we'd love to have your input on that. As Eric said, you may say, well, what about this story? What about this episode? What about this individual? And we'll put it out for a vote. Again, we want everyone's participation in this. I see Pastor Haynes here, and that night or that afternoon when we were on the square, to be able to look up and see your friends standing in solidarity based on what happened in Charlottesville. We didn't come there to seek cameras. We didn't come there to make controversial statements. We came there to be together. And then they asked the man of God to pray. They asked the man of God to speak. And the rest is history that is being unfolded right now. And to have you here, my man, I had no idea. You don't look like a picture. But man, to have you here also, that is humbling. Then I look up and see Abraham Lincoln here. I'm like, oh yeah, something good is happening right now. So what we want to do is we want to take any questions you may have, and then we'll pray over the food and allow you to be fed.
I just wanted to say one thing. Thank Eric for inviting me and trying to be a part of this, but I have to pay homage where it's due first to the Lord and Savior, but my wife, my best friend, my buddy, she's a descendant of about a dozen USCT soldiers from Williamson County. And she's part of the history of what we're about. She was with me. My buddy was with me through this whole thing when I first got asked to do this. But the most important part, my friend Seth here and my grandson, this is the future.
Amen.
This is the future. He's been out to the cemetery to see the statue, and he's been with me in encampments and whatnot. He's put on the blue uniform since he was a little fellow. But he's almost 10 years old, and what we're doing now, what we're doing here and now, is extremely important because he will remember this. That's why I wanted to let y'all know how important it was for him to be here.
That's right.
Amen.
He was talking about the ancestors. out of the 20, they were on both sides. Some fought with the Confederates, more fought with Confederates, but it was more with the Union. But it was, they fought, and it was the Crites. They were the Crites, C-R-I-T-E.
I just wanted to share that. Sorry.
And if you don't have a question, you can also render a comment. If this feels good in your soul, or if it doesn't. Yes, Reverend Green?
Just speaking my head so I get my sinuses air. But I just want to say that what I've heard so far, I just want to commend those of you that have initiated this, because as it has already been said, we're talking about the future of our children, learning the correct history, and that is so important. And I think you all are really on the right track, because the only way to really truly bring this about is to bring truth to power. As long as you're telling the truth, the only persons who want to be offended are those who do not want to accept the truth.
Amen.
So stay on that course, as you said, bringing out not only the facts, but the truth. And the truth shall what?
Questions, comments?
I would just like to say, I as a native of Mississippi, and I would say, I've even been in school that we've only taught one side of history. And even in Mississippi, I didn't learn about the whole story about civil rights, about the Civil War until I got into college, to be honest with you. So I reading, and so I know how important it is I feel for every city, every community to really tell a story on both sides. Because I know that, especially young black kids, that we don't know the whole story. You come from Mississippi, I tell you, they only told one side of the story. And so if you didn't explore it and go further on your own, you would only never know it. So I'm not from here. I've been here in Franklin for about 10 years now, and so I applaud you. I applaud the effort, and whatever I can do, I serve in this community and trying to help people all the time. So definitely, I support and applaud the efforts that we're doing.
And one of the reasons we took your names is so that we can contact you, because we're talking about maybe taking a Friday or Saturday to have Eric take us on a 3-hour tour. Sounds like Gilligan's Island, for him to take us on a 3-hour tour in Franklin. I went on that tour once, many years ago, looking at the Carter House and Carter Plantation, and I definitely need to go again to look at it through the eyes of someone who is making an intentional effort to give me a fuller picture and not just one dimension. So we'll let you know about that too. Yes.
I just like to say I'm very impressed by the part that I've heard. I do apologize. Nashville has a situation going on. And I've spent the last hour and a half trying to get out of Nashville. So my apologies for being late. I will make contact and speak with those of you who are here so I can get caught up to speed. It's a very interesting thing, but mostly I just want to apologize for being late. This isn't usually me.
I was just, since you said the city was in agreement with doing the changes, how would it be funded? Would that be through Williamson County, City of Franklin, or would it be private donations, or if we haven't?
I think it'll be a combination of both. There.
The markers are probably, if we're talking about the markers that I have suggested, they're about $2,000 each. So that's a small amount of money. I have offered that the Battle of Franklin Trust could fund those. That's pretty easy. I think the answer is it's going to be private money. I don't believe that. I don't know that the city should fund this. I really think that there's more power in private community effort. It really shows the power of the people. That's what we've done, for example, with the battlefield reclamation effort, is we've pulled a huge segment of the community together. I think a fundraising campaign to put up a statue, and we put a price tag on it, I think that money will come in like that, I really do. And the city, again, is very supportive of it. The one down at 5 Points will be interesting, because that's actually county property, but I think they'll defer to the city, because it's within the city's jurisdiction, and I think it'll fit very nicely into what's already there.
So will we have to, do you have to pass any laws or get anything passed?
I believe that in, around the monument, it would be a border mayor and alderman decision, and it may be the same here, but it wouldn't be a law, it would simply be a resolution. And and that's why if it's funded privately, it's within the city's right-of-way and within the county's jurisdiction, meaning it's their property. And I think, my belief is that it would be pretty straightforward. Now, there will be people who will not like this.
Amen.
I will tell you, there will be some. But they are, I'm not sure that they yet realize it. They've become very marginalized.
I'd like to make a comment on that, because, you know, people can change.
Yes.
People can change. When the pastor first got up and talked about the water fountains and this and that, I grew up in that too. I'm pushing 72. And I grew up in Lincoln County, Tennessee, Fayetteville, Tennessee, and we got a little Confederate soldier standing up there too. And as a little boy, you know, I mean, man, as a little boy, I was Big Johnny Reb, you know. But people can't change. And folks, I got to tell you, I moved back to Nashville, Tennessee in 1974. And you couldn't have pushed me in this church with a bulldozer, okay? But, you know, God, and I didn't see it then, I didn't. God started putting people in my life slowly but surely. Now, I hesitate to do this, but I'm going to. That picture right there, picture says a lot. That looks like a happy, happy couple right there. That was my mom and daddy. He was a card-carrying Klan member. I'm not. I didn't even know that until years after my father was dead, you know, because he was very seldom in my life. But yeah, but I'm not who my father was. But I came close. I came close because growing up in North Alabama and southern Middle Tennessee, I was taught a whole different story. And my life began to change. And I met this guy 17 years ago at a Veterans Day parade in Nashville, Tennessee. He was the only Yankee Civil War soldier in the parade with a Yankee president, and we marched behind the whole Red Army, you know. And by the time we got to the end of that road, we were pretty much the best of friends. We have traveled this country together. And we, I think, have made a difference together in the lives of a lot of school children, you know. But what the point I'm trying, if I can change, anybody can change. But they have to have, you have to be able to crack that book open just a little bit, you know. I was talking with Eric before this, I'm going out to the Carton Plantation for Blue and Gray Days again this year. I've been going out there for several years. 20 years ago, they wouldn't let me come out there.
True.
20 years ago, they wouldn't let me come to the Carter House, you know. And Bill can tell you, I got my first piece of hate mail when I started doing Abraham Lincoln, you know. I've had guns pulled on me. I've been called everything that you can imagine. I don't let much of that bother me because I used to be one of those. I know what they're going to say before they say it. And they know that when they're talking with me, well, they don't like talking with me because, you know what, it's like looking in the mirror. And so, you know, and so this guy has taught me an awful lot about what these people did, you know, This is something I think if we can start this here, it will grow. Because people like positive stuff.
Yes.
Could I add one thing? I think what you're describing is exactly what Hewitt and I talked about. The white community was also conditioned to believe that the Johnny Red, that the cause of the Confederacy was, you know, they're just fighting for home, fighting for what they believed in. And that was the whole Confederacy. And there was, I grew up in, as Chris reminded me, white as bread. But I heard all of the stereotypical comments. And I remember as a boy questioning, how is it that someone who's never even been around someone who is black use this language? How can they, being raised in Minnesota, defend the Confederacy? But it wasn't until I began to travel and I began to encounter some of those same people that I had to change my way of thinking. But I would think of the next generation. So I still carried some of it. But I remember the change was slow. But the people are out there. I remember, it's been 5 or 6 years. We had a protest outside the Carter House. 100+ members, most of them wearing their fancy black vests with a Confederate flag on it. They were protesting a move we were going to make. They didn't like it. And I remember a lady who I know that the two of you have met standing right up front poking her finger in my chest. And she said, "You are from Wisconsin. You don't understand." And I said, "Well, I'm from Minnesota and there's a difference." But you're right. I don't understand. I don't understand how someone like you can continue to think this way about history and people. And I've tried to do everything I can to marginalize those kinds of people. They are not welcome any longer. And if they don't like that President Lincoln is there, well, tough. He'll keep coming back as long as he wants to keep coming. I want to thank Kevin for meeting with me, and Chris and Hewitt especially. Hewitt, you remind me a little bit of my grandfather, which means you're older than me, I guess. But it's you listen to what I have to say, and I want to thank you especially.
Well, let's pray for the food. Let's keep talking, conversing. And if you have to step out, we understand. But we're going to try to finish right at 1 o'clock. But we'll take more questions. Again, let's converse. If we haven't gotten your information, please make sure we get it, because we want to keep you informed.
Yeah, Chris, let me say something.
Yes.
There's 3 different kinds of sandwiches, and then there's white and wheat bread. So just take your choice, and then just grab a drink out of the cooler. But you'll see everything's written on the top of the boxes.
Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for what our eyes have seen, what our ears have heard, what our hearts have felt. Lord, we know that you are up to something good. We know that you are a redeemer. And we know, Lord, that junk and mess and sin doesn't scare you. Matter of fact, Lord, you're able to jump right into the midst of it and turn it around and work it for good. Because, God, we love you. And we know we're called according to your purpose. And your purpose, Lord, is that we might be one without having to be the same.
Yes.
That we can be unified without submitting to uniformity. And Lord, you've called us to be a community of people. And Lord, it's time to have a fuller history. It's time to hear stories that we have never heard before or may not be too familiar with, all of us. So God, would you bless this movement? Would you bless this moment? Would you bless this food for the nourishment of our body? Thank you for this church and the history that is present here. Thank you for the history of this young lady who was able to influence her husband that he might stand for generations to come as a model for one of our soldiers in the Union Army. Thank you, Lord, at each table, in each heart, is a story that you are still writing. And you allowed us to be here today, that we may do something collectively that we could never do individually. So thank you, God. Get the glory. We pray in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Help yourself.